12. September 1984, Dresden, VEB, Nachrichten Electronic, Proofstand, 4. In a notebook with a brown cardboard cover, a 50-year-old engineer writes, 1984, GDR electronics plant. I build devices so the state can hear its citizens. In 2010, I build devices so citizens can broadcast themselves. It is a sentence he cannot say aloud. It is a sentence that would cost him his job, his freedom, perhaps his children's futures. It is a sentence that summarizes a life lived between ruins and laboratories, between ration cards and clean rooms, between silence and signal. He signs the page simply, K. His name is Karl Meissner. Born 25 March 1937, Breslau, Silesia, son of a railway clerk and a seamstress, refugee child, apprentice in a radio workshop, engineer without illusions, witness to the mathematics of hunger, guilt, rooms and wires. We begin in the rubble. 8 May 1945. Breslau is no longer German, it is Rochefort. It feels like a switch thrown in a machine, too fast for the mechanics to bear. The Red Army moves in. The German administration collapses. Street names change like paper labels peeled from jars. The old neighbors look at one another as strangers. There are notices on doors and whispers in stairwells. There is fear. There is relief. There is nothing to eat. Karl is 8. He watches his mother turn a soldier's torn blanket into trousers. He watches his father vanish into a column of prisoners. He watches bricks lifted by women with scarves over their hair. He will write later, the city unmade itself. The old order switched off. Then something worse and something kinder came in its place. Bundesarchiv photographs show long lines at communal kitchens. Allied intelligence summaries describe general disorder, fear of retribution, shortages of fuel and food. Soviet occupation reports, released decades later, list reparations to be extracted, machine tools, locomotive parts, entire factory halls unbolted and shipped east. The mathematics of industrial capacity becomes the mathematics of hunger, calculated in calories per capita, tons of coal per day, cubic meters of wood brought in on handcarts. June 1945, Karl and his mother and sister are told to prepare for resettlement. The word is administrative and bloodless. The act is not. Trucks, then trains, then a wagon. They arrive in Saxony at the end of August. They are expellés in the post-war arithmetic. 12 million Germans from the east join the west and the center, arriving with bundles and papers, some with grand pianos on flat cars, some with nothing. Expellés move into towns already in ruins. They are not greeted as brothers. They are greeted as competition. An occupation report from the US zone in Bavaria notes increased tension between locals and newcomers who are perceived as making demands on scarce housing stock. In the Soviet zone of Saxony where Karl lands, the Soviet military administration issues orders to allocate rooms. The arithmetic of rooms reads like a ledger in a factory, square meters divided by persons, meters per person, reduced, walls erected to split apartments. The new boy from Breslau sleeps in a curtained corner of a former dining room. The old landlord glares at him over soup. Tremmerfrauen trade bricks. Children trade stories. Men trade hours for sacks of potatoes. Cities rebuild with hands and pails and sledges. Photographs in the Bundesarchiv hold the look in the eyes of women lifting stone, the stare of necessity. They are rescuing the state from collapse and themselves from the cold. The rubble is not simply rubble. It is the material of a new moral economy. Autumn. 1945. Americans, Britons, French, and Soviets publish proclamations. The words matter and also fail. Denazification begins with forms. An American-sponsored questionnaire in the US zone runs to 131 questions. In the Soviet zone, there are also lists and hearings, but the system is different, faster, more political. There are categories in the West, precise and bureaucratic, major offenders, lesser. There are categories in the East too, but they are merged into the project of building an anti-fascist state. The mathematics of guilt is not moral, it is administrative. Spruchkammer hearings in the American zone process nearly 5 million cases. The statistical tables are clear. Major offenders are rare, followers are common. Many men become Mitläufer by declaration and survive by self-description. They say, "We just followed orders." They say, "We had no choice." They say, "I joined because it was required." The documents, the hearings, the letters of exculpation pile up in archives. The majority receive fines or temporary bans. A minority go to prison. In the East, the purge is swift in some sectors and lenient in others. Industrial managers are removed. Village mayors are replaced. Judges and police officials are vetted. Teachers attend re-education courses. Engineers are forgiven more often than not. The system needs those who can make things work. Karl's father reappears in a postcard dated 3 February 1946 from an internment camp near Minsk. Then he does not reappear. K is officially the son of a missing father. In his school file at the local Oberschule, this status brings an advantage and a wound. The anti-fascist state needs sons of workers and soldiers. It does not need questions about missing men. 1946–47, the hunger winter. The thermometer drops. The coal piles run out. The ration cards are numbers cut into life expectancy. Calories per day, 1,800, sometimes less for children. Mothers count cubes of sugar. Boys steal lumps of coal from freight trains. Cigarettes become currency. A packet of American Camels appears like a messenger from another planet in a Saxon market. It buys 5 eggs, a handful of butter, favors. The black market becomes a kind of dark mirror economy with its own arithmetic, its own laws. It is unacknowledged, necessary, corrupting. Allied intelligence summaries in the Western zones track prices in cigarettes and chocolate. In the East, the police do too, and the statistics end up in files stamped vitrolic. Across the zones, displaced persons live in camps. There are camps for Jewish survivors, for forced laborers from Ukraine and Poland, for POWs who came back late from Soviet captivity. They exist near German towns and are also invisible to them. A 1946 U.S. Army report on a DP camp near Fürstenfeldbruck uses the vocabulary of inventory, beds, blankets, bars of soap. Oral histories recorded in the 1990s include a different inventory: faces looked at and looked away from, a smell of disinfectant, a boy from the town staring through the fence until a Polish man stared back and did not blink, and the boy ran. Karl's first encounter with the camps is not personal. It is curricular. In the summer of 1949, as a 12-year-old at a new school in the Soviet zone, he is taken to Buchenwald. The tour is supervised, ideological, and also real. The air on the Ettersberg is warm. The gate reads Jedem das Sen. He doesn't understand the Latin letters or the German meaning, only the hardness of the iron. He sees the crematorium. He sees a table made of marble. A teacher speaks of anti-fascist resistance. The narrative is simplified and strategic. The shock is not. He comes home and cannot speak of it to his mother. He will later write in 1989, "They told us we were building a state that could never do that. Then they asked me to run the wires that listened at the doors." 20 June 1948, the West changes money. The currency reform in the Western zones invalidates the old Reichsmarks and introduces the Deutschmark. It erases savings. It erases black market prices. It resets a clock. In the East, the new money is not valid, and the old money becomes an instrument of political leverage. Berlin, city of both, becomes the place where air lanes are counted as lifelines. June 1948 to May 1949. The Berlin airlift is assembled, flown, sustained. The mathematics of tonnage executed with military precision. The numbers still have awe inside them: 270,000 flights, 2.3 million tons. Coal, flour, milk, medicine, chocolate. Children in the western sectors learn to wait. Children like Karl in Leipzig learn to listen to Western radio whispering through the static. They learn a new arithmetic: how many hours until the evening broadcast, how many whispered jokes before someone knocks at the door. 1952, the border hardens. The inner German boundary becomes a seeded field of mines, a ploughed strip, watchtowers with rifles, a visible line drawn through a country and through families. 17 June 1953, the workers' strike. They march in East Berlin for bread and lower quotas. The tanks come. The rifle barrels are pointed inward. The words in the newspapers are sharp and unbelievable. The photographs in Soviet files that will later be released show what everyone saw then and did not say. The fear on faces, the way a crowd disperses when a dozen tracked vehicles appear. In Karl's hometown, the VEB machine-building plant posts notices about anti-state agitation. The mathematics of work norms becomes a calculus of risk. Karl grows up inside this. He learns radio from a man who used to fix Wehrmacht field sets and then sold his hands and eyes to whoever needed them. He learns vacuum tubes, solder, coils. He becomes an apprentice at VEB Funkwerk Radeberg in 1954. He joins the Free German Youth because he must. He becomes a party member because he must. He becomes a party member because promotions require it. He wants to make things work. 1961, 13 August, the wall rises. Bricks again. The sound is familiar and wrong. He is 24. The branch manager from Radeberg calls a meeting. Words like repelling the class enemy are written on a chalkboard. Karl thinks of the friends he can no longer visit in West Berlin. He also thinks of the stability that walls can create. The mathematics of barriers: you count loss and fear, and then subtract some other fear, and what remains feels like order. 1968, Prague. The tanks cross another border. The negotiation inside those rust-red metal bodies is the same: maintain control. The people in the GDR watch on television, a screen whose electronics are cousins to the machines they build. Karl has pictures of his sister's family in Karl-Marx-Stadt tacked above his workbench. He stares at the eyes in those photographs and makes a vow to never get the eyes in his own house into trouble. Silence becomes a skill. He practices. By 1971, Karl is a senior engineer in a division that makes Mess und Prüftechnik. Measurement and testing equipment is the neutral name for devices that make other devices reliable. The laboratory is clean, fluorescent, humming. He calibrates oscilloscopes. He writes reports that are paragraphs of nouns and numbers. In 1975, a man in a grey suit comes to his office with a request. It is an invitation and a command. The Ministry for State Security has a program it calls Operative Technische Sicherung, the security of operations by technical means. There are engineers inside the ministry. There are also engineers outside, in factories and institutes, who provide scientific technical support. Karl is asked to design with them. The request is specific: a microphone no larger than a button, with a frequency response that can capture whispers at 3 meters, with a transmitter that can pass through plaster walls to a receiver in a Volkswohnung across the courtyard. The device must be efficient, durable, invisible. The files in the BSU, the archive of the Stasi, will later list Quellen and Mitarbeiter, sources and collaborators, sources and collaborators. They will include coded names and field names and dates. The file for Klaus, who is Karl, will be thin, not enough to bring him to court, enough to keep him awake. He says yes. He convinces himself it is just engineering. He tells himself he is building ears without faces. He tells himself he is valued for his skills. The anti-fascist state needs him to keep fascism from returning. Words become a soft white noise in which other sounds hide. He builds Wanzen, bugs for bedrooms and offices. He designs radio frequency amplifiers that can pull a human breath out of air thick with conversations. He learns how to conceal a microphone behind the cotton mesh of a framed print of Goethe and Schiller at Weimar. He learns the mathematics of decibels, of power draw, of battery life. 12 hours per cell, 24 with a passive transmitter. In his notebooks, he draws coil windings as carefully as architects draw cornices. He labels pages with codes. Later, after 1989, researchers will match his handwriting to devices recovered from walls in Leipzig. 1980, a complaint is logged that a device failed during a storm. Karl writes a report. The proximity to a 220V line produced repeated spikes beyond the tolerances of the buffer circuit. Future designs should use a metal film resistor at R3. The language is precise and moral neutral. The effect is moral and precise. How does the mathematician of hunger become the engineer of listening? By increments. By a series of steps, each of which is almost inevitable, and all together form a line you cannot see from where you stand. 1984. The year that has become shorthand for something that did not need Orwell to exist. In September, he writes the sentence, "He cannot speak aloud." He writes it partly as insurance, partly as confession, partly because he is not sure the state will ever end, and he wants a future reader, even if it is his grandson, to know that he knew. He buys a notebook and gives it a file name, Hausbook, 1984-1989. He writes in block letters as if he is a map. The GDR schools tell a history in which criminals were punished and the people resisted. The monuments tell a story of political prisoners from the Communist Party, of workers with raised fists. The commemoration is sincere and selective. Karl's son, born in 1964, learns the names of Ernst Thälmann and Karl Liebknecht. He does not learn about the Jewish family that lived across the street from his own mother in Breslau and disappeared in 1942. He learns about the bombing of Dresden as a crime, and hears adults whisper about it as a wound. School books in the West, meanwhile, downplay the guilt of ordinary people for a decade after the war, then change in the 1960s under the pressure of students and trials. In the East, guilt belongs to capitalists and Nazis and people who left. The new state is clean by definition. The mathematics of memory operates by subtraction, but memory is stubborn. In 1978, Karl and a friend visit Buchenwald again. The guided tour is different now, more names, more detail, more international. He stands by the crematorium. He still cannot speak about it at home. He does not tell his wife that the little speaker in his pocket has microphone capsules like the ones on the bench. The line between private morality and public complicity is drawn in graphite and ink. It is drawn on forms and in notebooks. It is also drawn in daily life. He signs non-disclosure agreements. He signs off on test results. He signs a petition congratulating the party on its 30th anniversary. Each signature is a subtraction from a total he does not calculate until later, when the ledger is out of the drawer. 1989. A year that collapses and expands. Monday evenings in Leipzig, the Nikolai Kirche fills with people holding candles. "Wir sind das Volk," they chant. The slogans are short phrases with the weight of decades behind them. The mathematician of wires listens to a city proving that architecture can be a political instrument. The security that the wall promised is finally less than the freedom it costs. Karl watches the monitor in the laboratory flicker with news from West German television broadcasts from across the border by a pirate antenna. He watches an East German commentator read from a paper with shaking hands. He hears that travel rules are changed, effective immediately. 9 November. The air is cold and sharp. The wall opens. People pour through. Someone plays a trumpet. The mathematics of crowd control fails. The calculus of fear breaks. Karl stays home. He has lived long enough to be cautious at the moment others are free. He goes 2 days later with his wife and son to a crossing near Hof. The smell of roasted chestnuts, the sight of a West German policeman giving flowers to old women. He arrests the moment in his mind like a photograph and puts it next to the one of the ruin in 1945 and the one of the lab bench in 1984. The files empty into the streets. The Stasi Unterlagenbehörde will later catalogue them. People find their names in boxes. People find their friends' handwriting in reports. People forgive. People do not. There is no system that can manage the arithmetic of personal betrayal. There is only the ledger of a country. The law is passed. The lustration is partial. The economy is restructured with violence. 1990, 1 July, monetary union. The Deutsche Mark comes to the east. It feels like oxygen. It feels like a seizure. The Treuhandanstalt sells state enterprises with astonishing speed. Factories shut with the sound of doors slamming down an empty corridor. The VEB, where Karl spent his youth, is unspooled like a faulty transformer. He is 53. He has a son in school and a mortgage on a flat in a prefabricated block. The math of redundancy is brutal. Years of experience multiplied by 0 jobs still equals 0 jobs. Unemployment is a word that returns to German life. Karl takes a job installing satellite dishes for West German television in villages that used to listen to it with stolen antennas. He kneels on roof tiles and bolts down new capacity for signal. He carries wires across rooftops where, 45 years earlier, boys carried coal. He meets pensioners who saved copies of Der Spiegel under their mattresses like secret radios. Then something opens. Dresden becomes Silicon Saxony. The German state and private industry build clean rooms where cameras are mounted to gyroscopic arms, and a piece of silicon changes the future with each doping step. Siemens becomes Infineon, becomes Qimonda. A cluster grows. Not far away, a new institute for microelectronics opens. Karl is too old for a PhD. He is not too old to build teams. He is hired in 1995 as a project manager for a small firm making microphone arrays. He understands the old mathematics of sound and the new mathematics of signal processing. He learns English for meetings. He learns words like GSM and TDMA and then UMTS. He understands in his bones how a voice becomes a voltage, becomes a packet, becomes a conversation across oceans. 2001, a startup in Berlin promises to build the first all-in-one digital communicator using off-the-shelf parts and custom firmware. They do not call it a smartphone yet. They call it a dream. Karl consults. He is 64. He approves PCB layouts. He argues about antenna placement. He argues about antenna placement. He watches young coders write kernels like magicians. He listens as venture capitalists talk about markets and churn. He goes home and writes in the housebush about technology in the 2000s moves faster than a train does. Old engineers ride it with careful hands. Young engineers ride it like a game. In 2007, the iPhone appears like a problem set solved invisibly in another room. It changes user expectations. It merges the mathematics of signal with the aesthetics of glass. It also changes politics. 2010, Karl is 73. He works half-time for a Berlin startup whose app allows people to stream live video from their phones. The code turns a protest into a broadcast. The app turns a police line into a visual argument. Karl never sees the servers. He sees the little microphone on the bottom edge of the phone and thinks of the capsules he hid behind wallpaper in 1978. He writes again in the Hausbusch, 1984, GDR electronics plant. I build devices so the state can hear its citizens. In 2010, I build devices so citizens can broadcast themselves. He understands that one does not. He understands that the two are bound by circuits and choices. We return to the rubble, because rubble is more than stones. The aftermath of war in Germany was civil. It was about streets and schools and ration cards and forms. It was about documents stamped with eagles and then with shields, about files with classified stamps, and then with Freigegeben. It was about the arithmetic of daily life. 5 mouths, 2 potatoes, 1 ration card, 3 cigarettes. It was about the mathematics of guilt. 1 questionnaire, 4 witnesses, 2 internal letters, 1 job. In the American zone, people filled out detailed questionnaires asking for names of party memberships, donations, and participation in organizations. The forms took hours, days. People asked friends for affidavits. I swear that Herr X opposed the regime. The Sprüchkammern weighed these words, sorted people into categories. They were supposed to be the arithmetic of justice. They became, inevitably, the arithmetic of stability. You cannot run a city if you dismiss everyone who lived in it. You cannot build a power plant with only saints. In the Soviet zone, in which Karl grew up, the denazification was both more brutal and more performative. The land reform in 1945 broke up estates. Engineers were moved from positions if they looked like political threats and kept if they were needed to meet industrial quotas. A party history published in 1952 states that the roots of fascism lie in monopoly capital and militarism. The working class, together with the peasantry, builds the new order. This became, effectively, an absolution for followers who joined the new order. The mathematics of guilt in the East counted classes. The mathematics of guilt in the West counted actions. Both systems needed to continue life more than they needed thorough justice. Expellees like Karl brought with them habits and stories. They brought new dialects into Saxon villages, new recipes into kitchens, new resentments and dreams. Their presence put pressure on rooms and changed elections. In the West, political parties learned to court them. In the East, political categories and ration cards absorbed them. The arithmetic of rooms did not care about where your grandfather was buried. It cared about wall thickness and stove access. The occupation authorities wrote allocations. The police enforced evictions. Families watched strangers walk through doors with paper in their hands and felt that those papers changed reality more than any weapon. German contact with victims of the Nazi regime was uneven and often mediated by power. DPs lived nearby and apart. Camps held survivors who could not go home because home had become a graveyard, who could not stay because staying required a new language of trust. Allied reports describe the tensions, thefts, misunderstandings, marriages, children. German townspeople sometimes sneaked food to the fence. They sometimes avoided those fences entirely. A few opened their doors. Most did not. The mathematics of scarcity set limits, and the mathematics of fear set others. Schoolbooks and monuments talked of suffering. In Dresden, the story of the firebombing filled the air like smoke for decades. In Frankfurt, the The student movement of 1968 insisted on a new mathematics of responsibility and pushed it into courtrooms. In the GDR, museums like the Museum of German History told a story of resistance that was true but incomplete. People like Karl learned what the state wanted them to learn, and their errors became part of a collective miscalculation. Karl's job in the 1950s was rebuilding, literal. He soldered connections that held together radios, that told people how to stand in lines and where to find work. He believed in his craft. He learned to believe defensively in the state that let him practice it. He recognized, eventually, that the new democracy in the West and the new socialist order in the East both rested on bargains nobody wanted to write down. In the West, return to office followed a 1951 law that allowed former officials to reclaim their pensions and posts. In the East, return to work followed quiet understandings that engineers and doctors were needed. Both sides needed to forget in order to build. Both sides needed to remember to avoid collapse. The balance was never exact. The line wandered. By the 1970s, Karl was enmeshed. He watched in 1977 as the Stasi supervisors showed him a West German bugging device captured from a smuggler and said, "We are behind. We must catch up." He raised the frequency response of the device he was building by a notch and thought, for an instant, of the choir in the Nikolaikirche and of the fact that some notes deserve not to be recorded. Then he finished the design because the file demanded a signature. After 1990, Karl watched men with West German accents in their 40s stand in front of East German workers in their 50s and explain how to write a resume. He watched plant gates close for the last time. He watched a bus take away a milling machine that had his fingerprints on it. He watched politicians on both sides say, "This is for the best." He wrote in his housebook, "This is arithmetic, but it is our lives that are being added and subtracted." Marshall Plan shipments did not arrive in his street. They arrived in the West. The money rebuilt the Ruhr, rebuilt roads, funded factories. The Deutschmark and the Marshall Plan were a set of equations that solved for growth. In the East, reparations flowed and factories were dismantled. The Soviet system used German industrial capacity to pay for Red Army dead. It was a calculus of blood made into steel. Karl's hands did not feel the coins of the Marshall Plan. His palms felt the roughness of a crate marked for the East and the smoothness of a circuit board for the security services. But even in the East, the idea of a better future arrived as a component part. An improved transistor made in the clean room at VEB, microelectronic, Wilhelm Pieck, a new oscilloscope, a better training manual. People make futures in rooms. They pass the math of politics into the math of solder joints because the latter yields results you can test. When Karl thinks of post-war reconstruction, he thinks of women's hands as the first machines. He thinks of the formula for mortar. He thinks of ration cards with perforations that paper punches turned into a monthly life. He thinks of the smell of boiled potatoes on a cold day. He thinks of his mother's silence when the letter about his father never came. When he thinks of denazification, he thinks of questions rather than answers. He thinks of a neighbor who had been a party member and later a good citizen, and who died old and unjudged. He thinks of a teacher who disappeared one winter and came back in spring having taught farmers about crop rotations under a new regime, and who did not answer any questions about the winter. He thinks of justice as a product in the minds of men and women that sometimes fails in production. When he thinks of expulsion, he thinks of standing in a Saxon street with a wooden suitcase and a paper designating a room that did not want him. He thinks of learning a new dialect with his tongue because his belly was empty. He thinks of the day, much later, when he gave a glass of beer to a Polish programmer at a conference in 1999, and they talked about Rockwall with maps on napkins, and neither apologized, and both said, "Our grandmothers' graves." When he thinks of the camps, he thinks of the iron gate at Buchenwald and the washed stones underfoot. He thinks of the photo in a book he saw in 1990 of starving men looking at the camera. He thinks of the sentence, "Never again," printed on a red banner, and the other sentence, "We must listen to protect the state," printed in a memorandum, and he knows how sentences can make and unmake action. He thinks of devices. He thinks of the 1979 transmitter pressed into the plaster behind a picture frame, and the 2009 handset with its microphone array and noise cancellation that brought hundreds of thousands to a square via livestream. He knows that power flows through both. The difference is where the decision lies, in a ministry office with a lock on the door, or in a hand that can choose to press Go Live. Carl is not simple. His story is not simple. He built the wires the state used to listen. He built the microphones people used to shout. He's not redeemed by one and condemned by the other. He is a German man born in 1937 who lived through the war's end and the silence that followed and the noise that replaced it. His Hausbuch includes numbers. 1946, 900 calories per day. 1946, 900 calories per day. 1947, coal delivery every fourth Tuesday. 1953, 1737 who lived through the war's end. 1961, wall built, 2 friends lost to the west. 1975, first microtransmitter tested, 8-meter range. 1984, devices delivered, approval pending. 1989, border opened, 999, Werder opened, 1990, VEB liquidation, to January notice. 1995, contract signed, microphone array patent assigned. 2010, live stream of a demonstration in Berlin, date written without commentary. The Hausbuch also includes sentences. Truth is given in grams. Guilt accrues like dust. Rooms are political. Wires, remember. The archives are full of lives like his. Bundesarchiv records have the wrong spelling of his name in a file from 1952. Allied intelligence summaries mention the market where his mother once bought cabbage. Denazification files in the West include versions of men he could have been if the train had traveled 15 miles farther. The Stasi files include the numbers he wrote in precise hand. Oral histories record the voices of women who rebuilt and men who were rebuilt. He returns to Breslau with his son in 2008. They walk across a bridge with Baroque statues and a sky like a blue enamel plate. The city is Polish and alive. The house his family occupied before the war is occupied by a Polish family whose son, 16, is learning German in school. They talk in a combination of tongues and nods. There is no justice here. There is no injustice either. There is the arithmetic of time. He stands in Dresden in 2010. He listens to a choir sing in the restored Frauenkirche. He thinks of sound as physics and culture. He thinks of microphones in pockets and microphones in walls. He thinks of that sentence he wrote in 1984 and the other one he will write tonight. In the end, the war after the war is paperwork and memory. It is questionnaires and ration cards, subpoenas and visas, party membership cards and withdrawal slips, patent filings and house books, logs of devices delivered and delivery logs for machines dismantled and sent east, school curriculums and meeting minutes, passport stamps and digital certificates. It is rooms measured and wire lengths calculated, and faces watched closely and then not at all. It is the private ledger of a man and the public ledger of a nation. Carl writes in his notebook as the street outside his window hums with cars made in plants that once stood silent, as a neighbor's child films a skate trick and uploads it before the wheels touch the concrete, as the city prepares another commemoration service that will tell a part of the truth and therefore participate in the larger truth. He writes with the block letters he learned in a school that told only one part of the story. He writes with the hand that once soldered a copper coil to a transmitter that sat behind a photo of poets. He writes with the steadiness of a man who has counted calories and rooms and decibels and understands that the arithmetic of survival is not the same as the mathematics of justice. He writes, "The front after 1945 ran through our memories. It ran through our kitchens and our labs. It ran through forms and wires and the words we did and did not say. I have been on both sides of it. I learned late the only victory it allows is to keep counting honestly." He closes the notebook. He stacks it with documents, his birth certificate, a missing persons notice for his father, a denazification questionnaire with blank spaces where others have names, a technical blueprint,